Hey there. So, in our next reading, we're moving into Renaissance era Europe and a novel by a Spanish author. Now, the Renaissance begins around late 1400s, 1500s. Before then, it's called the Middle Ages, and that lasted for about 1,000 years after the fall of the Roman Empire. And the Renaissance marks the end of that era and the beginning of a new, what we can call modern era. Early modern age is also another way to refer to the Renaissance. And that's because there were important advances in technology and economics that created a new, more modern world. A growing middle class, artisans and merchants become more and more powerful and influential. Advances in technology like navigation. The Renaissance is also the time of exploration and colonization of the New World and other parts of the world. And that also brings in a lot of wealth to the colonizing nations as they, raid and take the native people's gold and money and resources. And so that economic change is also significant to creation of the Renaissance. The reason we call it the Renaissance is because there was a rebirth. Renaissance means rebirth. There was a rebirth of interest in the classics, in ancient Greek and ancient Roman texts, which officials of the church didn't like very much because these Greek and Roman texts were also pagan. They were from a time before Christianity. So, the Renaissance saw a lot of very exciting changes. Now, we are going to read selections from a novel called Don Quixote, which was written by Miguel de Cervantes from Spain. Now, this is one of the first novels ever written in Europe. A novel is a long fictional prose narrative, usually with multiple subplots and characters that show psychological depth and complexity. Now, Don Quixote is a hilarious story of an old man who just reads too many chivalric romances. Now, a chivalric romance is a type of story very popular during the Middle Ages about the great deeds of a knight. A knight errant is another way to refer to this figure, and that is a knight, meaning a warrior from medieval Europe, who wanders the countryside in search of adventure. The figure of the knight became very popular as a topic of stories, and these stories are very fantastic. They contain magic and dragons and great epic battles. And it is these that Don Quixote wants to imitate. The story of Amadis of Gaul is one really popular chivalric romance, and he is one of the heroes that inspires Don Quixote. Now remember, Don Quixote is not the man's original name. This old man's name was something the narrator can't recall, but he takes on the name Don Quixote of La Mancha because he's imitating the heroes that he reads about in these chivalric romances. So Don Quixote is his superhero name. Don is not a first name here. Don, D-O-N, in Spanish is what we would call an honorific, meaning it's a title that designates respect. Here, it's the title that we would give to a knight. So think of Don here as kind of like sir. So, this old man reads so many of these chivalric romances, these fantastic adventure stories, that he starts to believe that he too is a knight, and he goes on his own adventures in the countryside of La Mancha, which is the area of Spain where this man lives. Now, needless to say, Don Quixote thinks he is a knight on adventures, but the rest of the world just see him as a crazy old man. Don Quixote's overactive imagination ends up getting him in trouble in various funny ways. What he ends up doing is trying to act out scenes from these, fantastic adventure stories that he loves to read. And it's pretty funny how in the real world of 16th century Spain, this doesn't work out the way Don Quixote plans. So we see Don Quixote go into these misadventures, and we have to remember that on one side, there's what Don Quixote thinks is happening, which is based on his reading of these tales of chivalry. And then there's what everyone else perceives, meaning what's happening in, the real normal world of the people in the novel. So, I hope you enjoy the antics of Don Quixote and his squire. A squire is like an assistant to a knight. His squire, he attains, is named Sancho Panza. Now, we're only reading select chapters from this novel. Chapters 1 and 2 show us how the eccentric old man becomes Don Quixote. And then chapters 7, 8, and 9 show us Don Quixote with his squire, Sancho Panza, on some of their adventures. So the figure of Sancho Panza is important in this story because he acts as a foil to Don Quixote. A foil, F-O-I-L, foil, is a term to describe a character with opposing characteristics to another. So this helps move the plot along, and it also adds to the comedy of the episodes. Don Quixote is tall, lean, speaks in a very sophisticated way, rides on a slim, tall horse named Rocinante. Sancho Panza is a local villager. Probably doesn't know how to read or doesn't read well. Rides on a smaller donkey. He's short, stocky, loves to eat. He's very realistic and practical, so his responses to Don Quixote's flights of imagination make it all even more laughable. Now, while Don Quixote is a fun figure to laugh at, he also shows us how we all love to be the hero of our own story. And even though we know this old man has lost his mind, there's something endearing about Don Quixote. He just wants to live an exciting life of adventure and do good deeds. However, this reminds us of the dangers of what happens when we believe everything we read, or more specifically, when we don't understand the difference between fiction and reality. So, while you're reading, think about how this story might be translated into today. If Don Quixote were reading current adventure stories, or manga, or watching current adventure films, who would he imagine himself to be instead of a medieval knight? Maybe he would imagine he's Batman? Anyway, I'll see you on the discussion board.